I do think, and I think we've touched on this before, but I am confident, Jim, that you actually have a greater appreciation for the things that maybe a finer rifle will offer than somebody that just gets the good rifle.
You mean like when you have rounds in the magazine and you shoot one and you go like this, and then there's a new round in the magazine?
Yeah,
and
they
you
go
didn't
in.
have to get bloody fingers making it happen?
Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Mark is so rudely on his phone. Mark, you look like the millennial over there.
Product research, Jim.
Well, that's all right. So, anyway, we're coming to you guys with a... we're coming to you, man, right off the bat with an attack at Mark. But anyway, had a little bit of a listener request here. Somebody wanted us to go into the topic of more budget bolt-action rifles. And I say budget with a quote, unquote here, because we are still, usually talking about something that's a couple $100s. So, but the stuff that isn't exactly at that super high tier, all of these are generally coming in, or we have at least something that's an example of something that comes under four figures. And, want to go into those. We have a number of examples here on the table. And there was something else I was going to say. Oh, mood lighting today.
Yeah.
If you're watching on YouTube, brought to you by MC Ryan. It's a little bit different in here. Let us know how you like it. If you're a frequent YouTube watcher, let us know what you think about the lighting in here. Okay, across the table from Mark and I, though, we have Mr. Ryan Muckenhirn and Mr. Reuben Aleckson. And you guys have extensive experience with pretty much every platform here on the table. And if we're leaving any out, it's not because we don't like that rifle. It's just because we literally just kind of rated our safe this morning and just kind of found what fit the criteria, at least close enough. So keep that in mind. We'd love to hear other suggestions of stuff that you guys have used and liked in the comments. But anyway, Ryan, Reuben, a few of the questions I know that get asked around these, quote, budget rifles, and forgive me for forgetting the listener's user handle, but that they were asking, I know, is things like, okay, where are they going budget with it? Where's the manufacturer saving money so that we save money? What can you reasonably expect out of some of these more budget rifles? And then also things like, if you're going to make modifications to it, at what point, are you spending so much money modifying a gun that started out as a budget rifle where you might have been better off getting the more expensive rifle to begin with? Is there just sort of like one equation to get to a good rifle for budget, that all these manufacturers are doing? Are they all doing something different? So things like that. Mm-hmm. Where do you guys want to start? How about just in general, like what are you getting with a more, quote, budget rifle? What do we have here on the table? We got some Ruger Americans.
Do we want to talk a little bit about where a lot of these rifles fall? I think there's a couple of prominent pods of pricing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
There's the 350, 375 to 550.
Yeah.
And then it seems like there's kind of like another cluster of rifles on the market that are 700 to 900 or somewhere in there.
Got it.
Do you feel about right about that?
I like it.
By the way, this came from, thank you, MC Ryan, Ted B. from Heading, New Jersey.
All right.
So, yes, please. So discuss that a little bit here, because on the table here, and I can't remember all the costs off the top of my head or the price tiers generally that these are in, but like I said, we have some Ruger Americans, we got a TC Compass, we do have a Howa 1500, we got a Tikka here, T3X, and then over there is a Mossberg Patriot, couple of good examples. So what, like you said, so you've got that kind of, your most entry level that you're going to find that I would say is a good, comfortable rifle that isn't shady or
they're not low quality.
Yeah, they're not low quality. They're still good, but they're probably the most entry level is that 350 to 550 range that you're talking about. What are you getting with these? How are they making them again? So, quote, affordably. What can you expect to see? What can you expect to maybe be like? Oh yeah, that's where they save some money. Generally speaking.
I'll jump in. A couple things. First and foremost, something I noticed a few years ago that I want to point out. I'm going to pick on this here Ruger American Predator. We over the course of, I guess, the better part of a half a century, the Remington 700 bolt or action style has become this often copied, very popular, prolific action style. And from it, we've seen a lot of different rifles from, well, of course, the Remington 700 all the way up to full-blown custom builds running, $1,000+ for just the receiver alone. A few years ago, and I don't know who this person is, I don't know where the design cue came from. There was this really interesting shift in bolt bodies, bolt heads, and receivers. And I want to say that Ruger probably brought it out the fastest and most prevalently, but it's this very interesting 3-lug bolt. That's a one-piece design. And you'll see this style bolt and with it a similar action profile in many of these rifles, and some of them not pictured on the table, but they all share extremely similar design elements. They're very cost effective, and you end up with a really good product at the end of the day. So a couple of them on the table here share this. Of course, the Rugers, also the TC Compass, other rifles like Browning's AB3. I believe the Savage Axis has a 3-lug, or is that a 2? That might be a 2.
I believe it's 2.
Okay. But similar bolt design, and with it similar receiver design. This 3-lug, 1, 2, 3 lug bolt, one piece bolt, head, body, whole thing, handles attached, cocking piece behind it. In doing this, we've come up with a very strong and very quick to produce bolt body, bolt head that doesn't require any brazing like some other companies use for brazing on their bolt heads or brazing on their bolt handles or anything like that.
What do you mean by brazing?
So
what is that?
If it's kind of like welding.
Okay.
You would take a piece of metal, you'd have a brazed material, you'd heat it up to a very high temperature, and that will then fuse that component to it, like a Remington 700.
Okay.
Some of them have a 2-piece or a 3-piece bolt assembly where the handle would be brazed on, or the rear end or the front end could be brazed on. But with this interesting 3-lug bolt design, you can make a really effective, affordable rifle without having to sink a ton of money into the bolt and receiver. As kind of an added bonus, a 3-lug bolt generally gives you a pretty abbreviated bolt throw too. So you don't have this big, tall cam over like we would with, I guess, a Remington 700 or a Mauser or a Savage or anything like that. And we get this super clever bolt. And you'll see this in quite a few of these budget type rifles. And this is not a detractor. It's actually quite clever. And it's interesting to me because I see this shift away from the conventional 2-lug bolt design made famous by the Remington 700, although others came before it, but most commonly found on something like a 700, to this. And you end up with this cool thing.
Are you giving up anything by going to this design over something like what? There's all kinds of different actions. We've all run different actions before, and I think that when you pick up a gun and it's got kind of a rough, gritty action, doesn't feel that great. That's kind of it doesn't always ruin the entire shooting experience, but it just makes it a little bit more annoying. And then all of a sudden you pick up something like, and I'll just throw it out there, one of these Tikka T3Xs, and you just run the bolt on that, and you think like, oh my gosh, this is how it always should be.
Yeah.
Like, is there anything with this design that's causing it to be a little, could cause it to be a little bit more rough, or?
I would say finish
quality for sure. Yeah.
So like anywhere where you have a raceway, like this raceway here, where the guide is inside of the receiver that keeps everything oriented,
Like that.
and the bolt stop, yeah. If there is a digger on there or a ding, or it's on the inside of the tolerance,
There's tooling marks too.
yeah, you end up with that kind of rough feel.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm not going to say there's an expectation that a $350 rifle would have the same action feel as like a $650 rifle, but it kind of comes with it, right?
Okay.
So the finish quality is not to the same level.
It's not necessarily the actual base design of that bolt so much.
Right.
Like if that bolt were designed that way and then produced to just like the greatest standards of all time, it could just be like a really awesome bolt.
Mm-hmm.
But it really just comes down to the manufacturing tolerances and all
Correct.
that stuff. Okay.
So like a 3-lug bolt in itself is not inherently rough. In fact, they're often equated to being some of the best. So if we were to take the step up above Tikka, I guess, in the hierarchy, we'd go to Sako, like the 75 and the 85. They employ a 3-lug bolt.
Okay.
Tikkas are 2.
I feel like I've also heard of like 6 and even 9-lug bolts, though. Yeah.
Yeah. Little different attack on that. So like a Weatherby Mark V has 2 styles, 6-lug and 9-lug.
Mm-hmm.
They have their lugs actually on the rear. On the Weatherby's on the front, on the 788 Remington's on the rear. I don't know why that entered my head at that point in time. Little different way of doing it.
Okay.
If you look at the placement of the lugs, they're kind of in the same orientation, but they've got like little slashes out of them. So you end up with small lugs, but a lot of them.
Okay.
788s, again, just to back up, 788s are at the rear of the bolt, and I'm not sure why that entered my brain.
Well, because you don't know anything about guns.
That's
why.
probably the bigger part of this whole picture.
Right.
One, we can get the cost down on the rifle if we can make the manufacturing of critical components like the bolt down. So
I'm going to guess, just throw this out there, that bolt design allows for quickly adapting to new cartridges, maybe more quickly. Because, I mean, I was just looking at Ruger's lineup. We talk about the Rugers so much in here. There's so many other ones. But you look at the Mossberg Patriot, you look at, a lot of these other more affordable rifles, and they tend to be the ones where you go to the website and there's a drop-down menu that's extensive of what it's available in. Everything from your 223s to your Creedmoors to your big stuff like your 450 Bushmasters or even larger, and everything in between, 300s, all that stuff.
Yep.
It seems like they can just make it in anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so this is like the very easy part of the equation.
Yeah.
The next part comes to the barrel, which is a good segue. This is not, I guess, a hard, fast rule, but it is pretty commonly employed on these more budget line rifles, and this is not a takeaway. So for anybody who thinks I'm attacking these, I'm not. Headspace can be controlled a couple different ways on a bolt-action rifle. In the conventional means, we would have a shouldered barrel that when this is fit, like this, the profile of the barrel is cut to a hard, fast point here, and then it's threaded into the receiver. When the technician screws the barrel in, it indexes properly, controlling headspace against this shoulder, against the receiver. Mm-hmm. The other way to do this quickly and more cost-effectively is to use a barrel nut. So there's a threaded shank underneath here. Its threads meet the threads inside of the receiver on the barrel, and then that barrel nut put over the top of that controls your headspace. So we're skipping quite a bit of fitment work and like, a lot of, I guess, involved manufacturing processes by getting away from that shouldered barrel fitment.
Right. You can Savage was the first to become popular, right? Mm-hmm. But did they invent that?
I would doubt it. I would have to look that, and that goes back a long ways. The Savage Model 10, that gun came out in the 60s. Mm-hmm. I'd have to look to see if anybody else had something similar to that. I mean, machine guns had that.
Sure, yeah.
So
that's just what you hear, though. A lot of the time is like a Savage style barrel nut.
Yep,
right?
Yep. I suppose on the sporting market, they would have been the most
and
prevalent.
In theory, that allows you to basically take any barrel. If you're in a mass manufacturing environment, you take any action, you take any barrel, and then you just mate them together, and then you just use a little fine tweaking of how far in you've screwed whatever, and then you lock it down in place once it's good to go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The barrel nut to me seems like the quick, dirty, effective way to do it. Like you said, there's no like crazy drawback to it, and this is you got the Tikka here. It's kind of like the gentleman's way of doing it.
It does look cleaner.
One cool thing about Tikkas too is that it goes back to the manufacturing side of things, but the finish quality and the tolerances that they hold their receivers to is that you can repeatably go and buy a pre-fit barrel that a manufacturer will make for that and just thread it on because their tolerances on the receivers are so consistent.
Okay.
That really is an impressive, I'd say, advantage, Jim. And you were kind of speaking to earlier, like, maybe making some modifications, which ones would you maybe want to do that to? Maybe not, where do you want to put your money? So, I mean, that's a big consideration.
And to my knowledge, they have the same process as, say, like a Ruger or a Savage where they take a action out of a box and a barrel out of another box and they mate them together. It's just that their tolerances on both of those parts are so consistent. Whereas that's something that's not as focused on in maybe more a budget rifle.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things, and it's kind of an intangible, but it is something that's paid attention to during manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now the mating of a barrel to an action, it sounds often so simple because you just basically you thread the barrel into the action, you lock it down tight, and you're good to go. But Ryan, I know we were just discussing, I think it was just last week we were talking about some stuff because we were looking at various different rifles. In fact, this rifle here, this Tikka, will turn into something for the old BC series later on. But anyway, we were going into the act of torquing the barrel into a receiver versus using that barrel nut method sometimes that can cause variations in sort of how the barrel is pointed, and it's all very, very small, but we know that very, very small things can show up in your, where things are going down range. So what is that exactly, and how does that work?
So again, this will depend on the thread tolerances and the considerations made in manufacturing with adhering to like tight tolerances versus good enough tolerances. We thread the barrel into the receiver. We put the call it tight barrel nut over the top of it. In tension, if there's any slack in the threads, either between the barrel and the receiver, or the barrel nut and the barrel, when that goes into tension, it'll pull that barrel some way, and you get this observed point error. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't something that was immediately realized to me anyway when I had started here, but we started seeing an interesting trend and pattern with certain types of guns showing like a propensity for higher numbers of windage adjustment required to get zeroed. Mm-hmm. And it generally came from guns with call it tight barrel nuts. And it was funny. We sat and ruminated on this for a while, and actually Scott Parks had pointed the theory out to me like, oh, well, notice they all use this call it tight barrel nut. In tension, we're seeing the barrels move. And it wasn't such a situation where it's like the gun became unusable.
Yeah.
But it was interesting in that if we had several different rifles, some with call it tight barrel nuts, some without, and we put the same scope on all of them, we found remarkably different points of zero with respect to like the mechanical or the optical center of that rifle scope when we mounted it up on it.
Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, the guns that we were finding that maybe were were larger offenders, if you will, of being a little bit off center or whatever it was. Once you got the scope sighted in, it was a hammer.
Yeah,
where it was pointed.
Yep.
But it was just how much adjustment was
had very
needed.
little to do with accuracy. Just where that like comes into play. Why that might be an issue sometimes is because if you have a rifle scope, let's just say it's one of those scopes designed for maybe dialing your elevation for long range shooting. If you use up 20 MOA of windage in zeroing, well, if you look on the specs on the website, some scopes will have the same amount of windage and elevation, and some have an erector assembly that's shaped differently so that they have less windage travel, more elevation travel, and if you run that erector out to the side on a standard scope, like you can bump into the tube, and instead of having 100 MOA of elevation, you might only have 60.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So exactly.
So possibly less critical if you're putting together like a set it and forget it, type of setup where you're like, as long as I can get a zero, I'm good. Mm-hmm. But if you plan on dialing, some of that stuff might show up down the road.
Even still, like as you adjust your scope, and this will get into some of the recommendations we've given to people, which have been usually those adjustable rings and stuff. But as you adjust your scope, you're basically adjusting what portion of the image, which your optical system is delivering to the erector unit, what portion of the image that erector unit is magnifying and giving you to look at. And if you're using the more outer edge portion of that image inside to deliver to your eye, it's going to be a less than optimal image. The best image quality is at the center, the optical center of your scope. And so what we would do in these cases there are some rings out there that are adjustable, isn't that right? Like that's usually a pretty good way of going about cheating in some sort of adjustment into your scope without actually having to use the turrets.
Yep, absolutely. But I mean, that's really all there is. I do want to touch on another thing too. We've seen some custom builders over the past probably 5 years come out with a style of barrel swapping called the Remage. So it's a combination of the word Remington.
That was what my custom gun that we built on our Pod Adventure was.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, like, we could realize the thread specs for the inside of the receiver of pretty much any commercially available firearm, right? We know that it's supposed to be this threading. So they could, easily thread the shank of a barrel to thread into that. We still have to control headspace somehow. So they make this clever nut, same thing found on, like, this Ruger American Predator, that Mossberg, that Savage-type rifle. We can lock in that headspace part of it in your garage. And you could change a barrel very easily if you had the no-go gauges and the wrench. So that's actually pretty common on some high-end builds now, which is funny because it found its origins probably in the more budget side of things. It's now translating over to the custom side of things. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a really easy way to make a mass-produced product work well.
I think it makes a lot of sense for people who are getting into the precision stuff and shooting a lot, because if you're burning barrels a fair amount, then it makes it, gals who switch barrels once a year, if they're shooting that much, then it just makes it so that they're not having to do a big, send it to a gunsmith maybe every time. They can do it real quick. But yeah, I mean, my gun though that we built, hammer, absolute just freak of nature.
Yeah, I was gonna say accuracy wise, that thing, no joke.
Right. Looking at other cost saving techniques, it's not across the board, but it's pretty close to across the board. If we look at the stocks, they're typically injection molded, so you're not getting like a hand laminated stock on a lot of these, whether it's synthetic or actual wood laminate. You'll see like the trigger guard is part of the stock assembly, so that's removing another machine part from it. And the magazines, and this might sound a bit counterintuitive at first, but a lot of these have detachable box magazines, and they're typically of polymer construction. Again, this is not a dig on it. They're actually really effective. These are, for the most part, Rotary magazines across the board, which is generally, a lot of people love Rotary magazines. If you're familiar with the Savage 99 or the Ruger 1022 or any of those other ones, Rotary magazines have long held a regard of being low profile as far as like height, and then very reliable. But it's probably easier to build a single die for a magazine assembly than it is to, and then make 100,000 magazines on that die out of an inexpensive polymer than it is to machine bottom metal like you would find on a Remington 700 CDL. So a lot of these will employ this detachable box magazine in some fashion. Or they have magazine compliance with other commonly found magazines like an SR25 or an AR-15 or something along those lines. So you're eliminating yet another step in production, at least from like a detailed machine work and fitment process, by making a magazine that's compatible with the receiver, compatible with the stock, that's very inexpensive to do. And
something else that you see a lot too is in regards to the stocks. A lot of them will have like a V-block bedding block in them. If you look back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was still a lot of like Remington 700 style rifles being sold where they required a little bit more fitment, but the stock wasn't bedded on anything more than just your pillars and then like a recoil lug. And now you're seeing stocks that have that as a part of the molding, like the Ruger stocks. They have 2 aluminum V blocks where your receiver sits. You're not necessarily like going through and hand building a stock for that. The same way as they're taking a barrel out of a bin, they're taking a stock out of a bin, putting it together, making sure that and many times the recoil lug on the action is internal as opposed to being like a portion that juts down off the bottom. They're actually taking that, making sure that it fits, putting their torque spec on it, and then grabbing a magazine out of the box and putting it in. So it's more of a assembly line type of build than it is start to finish hand-built gun.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, you look pretty much across the board, and you can tell that there are a lot of similarities in sort of, again, quote, the equation that's used in putting these together. The stocks, I know, are like sort of one thing that I've run into a lot of times. If you're getting these sort of polymer stocks that usually come on them, there can often be a little bit more flex to them. Sometimes they're a little bit skinny. They don't fit you super well. They're not obviously usually adjustable. But then that can be changed oftentimes because funny enough, much like really actually a lot of other industries, but I know it happens in the car industry a lot too, which I pay a lot of attention to. A lot of the aftermarket parts to change things get made for the stuff that started out as budget items. I mean, like your Honda Civic market, right? I mean, it's like the most budget car in the world ever, started up the biggest aftermarket scene on earth. So yeah, then there's a gazillion and one aftermarket things that you can do to the guns.
I would say that covers a lot of the similarities that you see in the $300 to $500, $300 to $600 guns. And there's a few things that when you go into that next tier, that next pricing tier of $600 to $1,000 that you're going to get, I would almost start that conversation with either like the stock or the trigger. Like those two things.
Trigger yet.
Yeah, and there are some really good triggers in the entry level rifle price point. I mean, Rugers have a great trigger. Theirs is adjustable. I've never had a problem with it, but again, there's not as much consistency from gun to gun. You might still get one that has a little more grit or a little more creep in it. But I can say that I've found that when you go into that next tier, the triggers are one of one of the things, aside from fit and finish and maybe some stock features, triggers are one of the first things that you might go and spend $220 on an aftermarket Timney for your Ruger, and by that time you're already at that price point of the rifle that already has that.
And that's a good place to pause too, because I think part of the the impetus of this podcast was that email that we got where that gentleman was actually talking about the triggers, kind of the ones that are styled like this, a Ruger American, or maybe like a an AccuTrigger type trigger system. But so I think it's definitely a good place to stop and maybe talk about the differences between that style and maybe some of these more expensive ones.
On more of these budget rifles, I know looking at the Ruger here, looking at the Mossberg, and some other ones that I've seen, I oftentimes see this blade thing, which is reminiscent of like a Glock trigger or something like that. I don't usually see that on the higher end rifles. Usually it's just one flat trigger. That's basically a single stage. Am I right in saying that? These ones with the blade almost wind up feeling a bit like a two-stage, if you will. Well, why are they employing that, and why aren't the really high-end ones employing that? I got to say, I actually kind of like it.
Very clever way to make a very adjustable trigger that's pretty light out of stamped parts or like minor machined parts.
Now, how is it that you can achieve that better than you can with just a regular flat trigger like you can on this TC Compass over here?
Yeah, what is it? Yeah.
So if you like dissect, we'll pick on the Tikka and we'll pick on the Ruger here. If you take apart the trigger mechanisms, like this is a pack. This is more like individual components. We've got a sear, we've got a trigger shoe, and then we've got a network of springs. And
the Tikka's just bolt on and off.
Correct.
Yep.
So imagine the intricacies in building those components, their fitments, and then the assembly versus, and I'm not going to say stamped because I can't actually speak to what parts in here are stamped versus what are machined versus what are potentially mimed or cast. This is an easier way to do this on a more cost-effective schedule while still maintaining adjustability and safety.
Okay.
So the first part of this blade is effectively disengaging a safe mechanism. In that if this rifle was engaged, we had the bolt closed and the safety off, you couldn't pull the trigger by just pressing on the shoe. You would have to depress the blade in the center, and then the trigger would actuate.
Correct.
Or activate. It's a means that was discovered some time ago. I mean, it's a pretty old, I guess, relatively now, means of making a trigger that's user adjustable, safe, and potentially light from like a pullage or like a poundage standpoint out of mass-produced parts.
So why is this one then not why is it not capable or easy to do so? User adjustableness. Words are hard for me to say. I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah.
You can adjust it, not to the same degree of ease that you could this style of trigger.
So tell me if I'm wrong. Okay. Am I wrong in assuming this too? Because this was always kind of my thoughts on it, in that you usually see this like safety blade on more entry dollar rifles, and you don't see it as much on your, on even like something like a Tikka or Bergara or Remington 700. I had always thought it was more of like as people are getting into buying a rifle, they might not be looking at spending a lot of money, therefore they might not be like an enthusiast. Therefore, safety might be almost more forced upon them by a manufacturer in that price point. I don't know. That was just
and it is
a little bit of a lawyered up trigger.
It is absolutely, but one of the first things, if you get a gun rag, or at least back in the day, you'd read about trigger pull. It was one of the first things that was audited.
Oh, always.
And it's no mystery or anything like that. Like budget rifles will typically have worse triggers than more premium options. And to think of like the first commercially available style of this trigger, it was Savage's AccuTrigger. And I was working retail at the transition point between non-AccuTrigger models and AccuTrigger models. And the difference in the trigger feel or quality was, typically you would bring this to a gunsmith and he would do his best to make that non-AccuTrigger model good, or you replaced it, or you got an AccuTrigger and then you never worried about it. Because then you could dial it down yourself, or that gunsmith could dial it down to some semblance of a nice trigger.
Interesting.
But without compromising the safety part.
Right. And I get it now as far as the safety part goes, because the gun still can't go off until that blade is depressed.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Okay, so if you're using a gun that has a trigger made of a bunch of mass-produced parts that are all sort of like put together in the gun as it's being assembled, and then you allow the user to just dial that way down, then you don't know if necessarily it's going to be precise or perfect or could potentially go off.
Yeah, is there a bolt closure detonation impending?
I saw that happen one time.
Yeah?
It was interesting.
It
was on a super crazy custom bolt gun, and guy closed the bolt, bang, rifles pointed safely downrange. Yeah. As Pete likes to say, as long as you don't break multiple of the rules at the same time, you should be okay. Right. So, and nobody actually broke a rule there. They just closed the bolt and bang.
Right. I always like to say you'll have that on the big jobs.
Yeah.
I'll add to that, and I think the person who wrote in, they had a little bit of trepidation with that blade style trigger.
Yep.
When I first saw that, and I think part of it was like a form factor. Like it was like new. I thought it was kind of like maybe not super aesthetically pleasing. It was kind of weird to almost have two triggers in one. And I was like, nah, not for me. And then I shot one, and I'm like, that is a pretty damn good trigger. So if I was looking for a budget rifle, I wouldn't have the presence of that style of trigger. Actually, I would say that would be in the plus category if I was buying a budget rifle, if I saw that style of trigger.
Absolutely.
I'll tell you why I like it. And this is, again, in the plus column. When you're in a hunting application or really any type of shooting application, you're not looking at the trigger. And if you start to dial some of these triggers down lighter, it doesn't take a lot for you to grab the gun and pull up on an animal or pull up on a target and put too much pressure. This is kind of, it lets you know when you're on the trigger without pulling it. It's like, I'm right there. Okay, now I can.
Yep. There's something that's very... I still remember transitioning over from the Ruger American that I shot for years to something that was a little bit nicer. It had just a regular flat trigger, that was supposed to be a lot higher end. And I shot it worse at first because I was so, I couldn't figure out how to get comfortable with that trigger. It was a mystery to me. And now I've figured it out, in any time that's going on, it's not the gear's fault, it's the shooter's fault. And so I just had to get used to it. But there was this comfort factor of dealing with the blade trigger where, like you said, Rube, you can put your finger on something without having the gun go off right away, and then it almost puts your mind into this sort of frame where it's like, oh yeah, we're about to shoot. Things have begun. The trigger press has initiated. Okay, there's the wall. Now I know I need to do this, and then it goes off. So you have a little bit of
you said it. It's almost like a 2-stage.
It is.
But it's a safe 2-stage.
There's a lot of tactile cues there that are being delivered to your brain.
There are. Your brain is allowed to just sort of get ready for the event that's about to happen. But yeah, with those single stage, real nice, real light, just flat triggers, it was kind of like, okay, my finger's touching the trigger now, so at any point it could go off. It threw me off a little bit.
That's valid. When we started the range certification program, the first gun we used was a Savage Model 10. And then we transitioned to Tikkas after we burned that gun down and hit the same wall. Very accustomed to that mental process of, okay, in, engage, and fire, to now just in fire. And it took us a little bit to get accustomed to it. It's easy to go back, though, because now this is not an imposition. It's still familiar. And if there's one trigger style that we've probably had the most fun with, making content and doing things with, it's probably this gun, this style of trigger than anything. But, to have gotten off the tracks a little bit, if you compare it to a whatever you want to call it, safety blade adjustable, you could probably have a very real expectation that non-safety blade adjustable trigger is not going to be as nice out of the box. And getting it up to that level is either going to take a fair amount of gunsmith work or potentially a trigger replacement. The question is then begged, should you have just upgraded to the next tier of rifle at that point?
You're kind of defeating the purpose of your original purchase.
Which is it was also one of our original questions. Because like we said, you can modify these things a lot.
Yep.
I mean, stocks can change. Then you can put in different, more expensive magazines that the higher end guns are using. You can then be putting, or if you keep the stock, you can put cheek risers on it. You can do trigger jobs. You can probably, I don't know about changing out. Do people change out barrels on some of these? Or
sure.
Do they?
Yeah.
If you want to throw a carbon barrel in a Ruger American.
You could.
Technically.
You can look at it a couple different ways. The heart and the soul is going to be the receiver and the bolt, right?
Right.
That's the the means by which this whole thing works. The barrel is just a thing that maybe makes it work better or changes its caliber. You could absolutely do it. Mm-hmm. They make pre-fit kits for the Ruger Americans. A lot of the barrel companies do. You could have, I don't think that there's a popular carbon option as a pre-fit, but you could certainly, make one.
Interesting.
Yes. The question at that point in time is, does it behoove the shooter to go into a different rifle platform? Mm-hmm. And
I think, we don't talk about this a lot, but I think that the entry level rifles to me it's kind of like based on your level of participation, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, are you going to go up to deer camp in northern whatever state you're in and hang out with your uncles for a couple weekend days sometime in the fall? Like, then don't spend a ton of money on a gun. Or maybe your level of participation is like, Mark, you want to go and you want to hunt Iowa, and you're going to do it once every 4 or 5 years, and you need a 450 Bushmaster. Like,
right, yeah.
You're going to need a rifle, but you're only going to use it once in a while. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, that's a cool application for where I like a lot of the stuff like in the Tikka price range, the Bergara price range. Admittedly, don't have a ton of Ruger Americans, but I do have one in 350 Legend. Like, because I'm going to use that rifle only in this state or that state and only every 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, Reuben, if I was going to go with a straight wall, I probably would go with the Legend.
It's the better way to go, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've done, like, I think we've shown a couple of times my, we keep saying Ruger, but whatever. I think I pointed that out, but it is what it is.
I've shot it a lot, Jim.
I've shot it so many times. I'm so accustomed to it, but I've shot it at multiple long-range competitions. But I've gone the whole customization route with it. I found that so finish-wise, that's one thing that you'll see on some of these. I found that the finish on the barrel, especially with mine, it started rusting almost immediately after the first time I went out and used it. Now, part of that could have been me. Part of it could have just been, again, the finish or the steel composition, whatever it is. But I sent it off to get Cerakoted, so that happened. And then I took it to another extreme, and I noticed that the stock was flexing, so I got the Magpul stock for it. And then after I got that, I started getting some different magazines that would, trying to toy around with those. And then at one point, I had a Razor 5-20 on it, and so I kept throwing stuff at it, and I even had a Scott Parks trigger job on it, too, which was interesting.
Oh, dear.
I still have no idea what he did, but it actually ended up shooting pretty good afterwards.
But you talk about a $450 rifle with a $200 Cerakote job and a $200+ stock.
Yep.
You're at almost $1,000.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly.
For still
and then I threw precision match rings and the Razor 5-20 on it. And the thing is that if you're the kind of person who likes to go around and probably like surprise a bunch of people and kind of piss off a lot of people who probably like have super custom rifles, like I did that a
Jim,
lot.
That is you.
And I enjoyed every minute of it because people would show up with guns. And the funny thing is, like you said, Reuben, I probably had $1,000 into my Ruger. But,
yeah, plus your suppressor.
Plus the suppressor. That's right. I forgot I put a suppressor on there that cost a lot of money.
Don't forget the Atlas bipod, Jim.
And the Atlas.
Oh,
okay, yeah.
Well,
that's right.
I guess we actually got reminded of that when we did that 1,000
now.
under 1,000 video.
Hold on a sec, though. I think it depends on, like you said, how you're going to use it, but also your your personality type, too. Are you the person that doesn't want to futz with something? Or are you the person that like kind of wants to tinker and add a few things?
Right. Mark did say futz.
My wife uses that word.
I use the word futz a lot too, except I always mess it up and I say something else. But anyway, but yeah, no. The thing was though is going into that. I mean, did all those modifications and wound up going to numerous of these competitions. Just taking it out to the range, shooting out to 1,000 yards with it. And the thing is that I always got a good chuckle out of shooting it, because I'd be like, wow, this thing started out life as just some sort of relatively lowly gun that nobody would have really been impressed with at all. And now it's doing a lot of stuff that is quite impressive, and it does well. And in many ways, it probably could outshoot me even still to this day. But after a while, I started to realize, okay, I've invested a ton of money in this thing, and the fact of the matter is still that the bolt is not as smooth as I would like it. And every time I pick up one of Reuben's or Ryan's or whoever's it is, Tikka's, I'm like, gosh, that is nice. Mm-hmm. The magazine started feeding on me really weird when I switched to the Magpul stock, and I had to literally like finger feed rounds into the chamber, and that was weird. Again, I'm not going to blame anyone else other than probably myself, but I started messing around with that, and it was just like I had to keep messing with stuff all over the place. And then I found that guys with like different barrels were having less problems with them as the barrel would heat up and whatever. And I was like, I can probably keep customizing this thing, but at some point, it's still at its base started out as a affordable rifle, and probably I'd be better off just getting something nicer.
I do think, and I think we've touched on this before, but I am confident, Jim, that you actually have a greater appreciation for the things that maybe a finer rifle will offer than somebody that just gets the good rifle.
You mean like when you have rounds in the magazine and you shoot one and you go like this, and then there's a new round in the magazine?
Yeah,
and
they
you
go
didn't
in.
have to get bloody fingers making it happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Those
actually really
exact
appreciate
things.
that.
I kind of actually think that they all should do that. I feel like
still to this day,
but-
every time that happens, I'm actually surprised and pleasantly.
it went in.
Oh, wow.
Goodness.
But anyway.
Yeah.
Ryan,
That's
anything
all
to
I
add?
have to say about that.
That's it. Shall we move into the next pricing tier?
Yes.
Yeah.
Something not often, I think, discovered is like the barrel steel quality. There's a lot that goes into it, right? You look at a barrel and you think it's a barrel. And that's not really the case. It may sometimes be the case. It may not be the case. I'm going to bracket this with maybe a couple caveats. Best group I ever shot in my life was with a Ruger American Predator. Like, no question about it. It would have measured like .00 something with a Golden Eagle on it, and it was fired prone. It makes me laugh every time because the gun was $349.95, and it was literally one hole. But
Very popular in the F-class world, that rifle.
right. Is their level, and not to pick on the Ruger, but any budget rifle, is the barrel steel quality, the bore finish, the rifling process, the chambering process, the threading process, if you have a threaded barrel, is that to the same degree that you would realize when you would step up to, say, like a Tikka T3? And the answer is just no. It's not, and you can see this when you start shooting these rifles, when you start cleaning these rifles, when you start looking at your chronograph data. The lower end rifles will typically exhibit just kind of a rougher, around the edges machining process with respect to the bore. And to speak to the barrel steel quality, I guess maybe I shouldn't have said that because I'm sure they're all probably a 416 stainless or something along that lines, and barrel steel is probably barrel steel. But the processes by which they're rifled and threaded and treated.
Chambered.
Yeah, that makes kind of a big difference. We've been using the Tikkas here at work now for as long as we've been here, and actually a little bit before. And Reuben's team runs, you got to be over a dozen now, don't you? Mm-hmm. For the experiences and the demos and the shoots, because they just work. I mean, we shoot them thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and we don't get rid of the rifles.
Yeah, I think in 2019, it was over 30,000 rounds of 6.5 Creedmoor just between about 6 rifles.
Right. And their factory barrel steel, I mean, we transitioned one to your group after we burned it out at 52 to 5,400 rounds. Mm-hmm. You put a fresh barrel on it, and gun's probably still kicking. So to speak to the testament of quality and chambering and rifling and fitment, you do realize that when you get to that next tier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not to state that a budget rifle, any of these on the table, couldn't be a lifetime gun for you, but like when you do get up to that next level, it like very much so solidifies that point. Mm-hmm. Like you're getting into a rifle that you could look at it like a legacy gun, like that.
Yeah.
50 years from now, that you were the great grandfather that passed that gun down.
Yeah. And that's a good point in being something that you're proud to pass on too, because like if you buy something and you're planning on using it, like, a lot of people don't bat an eye when you buy a new TV for $1,000 and you do that every 3 years, and you're going to throw that away when you're done with it. You're going to pass this on to your kids and grandkids. Like, it's worth spending a little more usually if you're going to keep it and use it.
I think I did get my parents' old TV. That's a legacy thing. It was a Mitsubishi TV, and it was a 7-inch screen, I'm pretty sure.
7?
It was a TV about yay big.
That's like the Michael Scott, like the one on the wall?
Yeah, I think it was designed, but it was a little tube TV too, like a little, and I think it was
TV.
one of those ones that was designed back in the day when people wanted a TV in every room and like the bathroom included.
My first TV weighed approximately 500 pounds. I bought it at a garage sale on my way to college, and it was all black and white and had only the Superstation came in color.
Did this one make it to Sydney?
No, it did not. I willed it to Matt Turner. If you're listening, Matt, I hope you're enjoying that TV.
To your point, though, Reuben, on those new TVs, they're just not the same. Not those legacy items.
Right.
Like a rifle would be.
Yeah, exactly.
Jim, you touched on a little bit earlier, we're talking about barrels here and corrosion. And I guess I'm thinking like maybe interior, but I'm thinking more like exterior, surface rust, things like that. Are there different tiers of, the quality of bluing, or, you've got this Tikka here that's got the stainless barrel, which, that's kind of somewhat similar to like my Browning A-bolt, which I really like, and it has been a good rifle to me. But what's going on there?
So there's stainless finish, and then there's stainless.
Yeah, I was about to say, because sometimes you'll see stainless, and then all of a sudden it rusts, and you're like, what just happened?
Yeah, which is more likely like an electroless nickel process. That's a surface applicant applied to a steel barrel of some kind.
Okay, more of a
surface finish.
Yeah. Okay.
Versus like actual stainless steel.
Right.
One of those can be compromised and can rust very quickly, will rust pretty quickly, and one of them just is fairly impervious to the elements. And yeah, I mean, when you're in the more budget level, it's generally a surface finish applicant, and then as you go up, it's actually like the composition of that product, that metal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you just talking stainless there, or also like bluing or whatever? Is this bluing? What is the stuff that's on the outside of these barrels?
It could be blued. It could be black oxide. It could be.
Oh, right.
Yeah, there's a number of different surface treatments that'll give you that same look. I'd have to audit, what they actually are. And there's a couple that can emulate that look that are super impervious, like melanite, for example. Melanite's that stuff is phenomenal, that surface finish. And
is that on Glock slides?
Yep. Yeah, melanite or QPQ. It's also called. It's like it's similar to a bluing process in that you're immersing the metal part into a bath of salts, basically like boiling. It then has a controlled rusting process, and then like QPQ to speak to it, or black nitride or similar processes. That's then polished and then re-immersed and then polished again.
Is that what QPQ stands for?
Quench,
polish, quench?
Yep, correct. And you end up with this super hard finish, like super hard. Like you could, you've heard of a Rockwell tester?
Yeah.
Where they test hardnesses. It's harder than it was at its like alloyed, like virgin alloyed state on the surface. And there's like been a molecular change at the surface level of this product.
Is that kind of like anodizing on steroids?
Yes.
Yeah, I was about to say anodizing very.
Yep. As a benefit to this, it also becomes like highly lubricic, or like it has like an inherent lubricated property to it. When you put oil on it, a little bit goes a long ways, and it retains and it stays, and it doesn't gall and it doesn't wear and it doesn't chip. Reuben and I, when we used to shoot a lot of 3-gun together in my past life, I remember when the black nitride stuff came about, like the bolt carrier groups and the barrel extensions on rifles. It was like putting a V12 in your Honda Civic.
I think I said you can just wipe it off about 40,000 times the first year that I had one.
Yeah, and
wipe it off.
There is a lot of.
It sounds like an infomercial.
There's a lot of truth in it, though. Like the stuff does not hold crud. And it doesn't like get carboned on and caked on and corroded and galled. And yeah, you could take your bolt carrier group out after a few matches or even a season and just very light applicant of oil or solvent and just kind of wipe the crud off and put it back in and good to go. So you're probably not going to see that level of like surface finish detail put into a budget type rifle because it's cost prohibitive. Like that's a very labor intensive process for all metal surfaces. You're probably going to find like critical wear points that have seen some degree of polish and treatment, but not the whole thing. And it's again, just adding to the time it takes to produce that part and produce that part consistently and then affordably. So the further up the cost scale you go, the more and more that you're seeing, to varying degrees.
So would you say, I feel like what it sort of boils down to, if you will, is that, and we've all seen it, firsthand, and there's going to be plenty of people here who will comment because they've done it and seen it firsthand, is that every one of these guns on the table can be phenomenally accurate and shoot incredibly well. It's more or less the experience around using and owning it.
I call it touch points, and I don't know if that's the right word.
I'd say that makes sense.
But when we have a customer and we want to start out with a Strike Eagle tactical first focal plane, then we move to the PST and then the Razors, I will have them look through them, and they'll be like, yeah, I can see the target through all of them. They all have a similar reticle. What are the things that you have to interact with when you use it, though? Like a locking turret system or a parallax knob that is more or less tactile. When you adjust it, you can. It's easier to turn. Things like how you zero it. So on a rifle, it would be things like the trigger, things like the bolt smoothness. Where's the safety? Is it in an ergonomic place? When you have to clean it, like some of the finishes, when you're interacting with it, those are where you really realize it's almost like you have to touch it to believe it. You know, it's like when you're in the gun store and you see them all on the shelf, they all look great.
They do.
But when it's time to use it, like what are the things that I have to interact with, and how do they make the experience better?
There's a point too where those things could cost a lot of money, or they may not. And I think with budget rifles, it's kind of cool because you don't have to spend a ton of money to get those really svelte touch points. And I think, and it just happens that this rifle is kind of right in the middle here, showcase. I think that's really realized at about this level.
Yeah.
That's a sweet spot of in my opinion, high level performance at a lot of those touch points that Reuben's talking about. You're talking about, a great trigger, the bolt is super smooth. They're hammers. They're accurate. You've got that consistency too. And that's one thing I was going to ask, like a rifle like this Tikka, or maybe a rifle that falls into that bracket, is consistency from one to the other going to be greater than maybe some of the other options that are out there? Because I know, like, we buy these, like, you just know it's going to work.
You know it's going to feel exactly like the last one that you pulled out of the box.
Right.
In fact, we have 5 here that we got for the BC cartridges. And, you can bet that basically if we pulled all 5 of them out, it'd be, bolt feels the same, trigger feels the same. They probably, shoot the same, look the same.
And you mentioned, too, with aftermarket accessories, your magazine not feeding properly, there would be a higher likelihood that, because these are so similar in production, one to the next, that when companies are making aftermarket components, like we talked about barrels, you can thread a Proof Research pre-fit barrel on this today and know that it will chamber and it's head-spaced properly. You might have more variation from gun to gun in a lower price point, and hence have problems like feeding, right? Because they're taking one that they went and they bought or they got shipped from the manufacturer. They're building their aftermarket component around that single model, and if you have variation and tolerance stacking, you might not have your rifle might not feed out of a different type of magazine, or you might, accessories might not. I'm thinking of one rifle that we had that had a locking nut barrel, and the barrel didn't go down the barrel channel of the stock straight. I mean, it's just one side had a big gap.
Yeah.
So
and like you were talking about there with inconsistencies in aftermarket parts and stuff, that is what happened to me, because the feeding issue happened when I had a 5-round mag that worked just fine, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to be at a competition where we're going to need to shoot a lot more. I'll take the 10-round mag, and I grabbed it and didn't test it, and boom, we're on the field doing the full on, and the 10-round mag didn't work, even though they were supposed to be the same.
We all saw the video.
That's right. It is on video. I forgot about that. Thanks, Reuben.
It became not a single, like a semi-feed, not even a single feed.
Yeah. Manual feeding.
Manual semi-feed.
Double clutch.
Yeah. You don't want to granny shift it. But these are pretty sweet. Now, okay, let's talk about, again, being in this next tier up that we're discussing here, like where your Tikkas, your Bergaras, etc. are. What do you then? You seem like you're getting a lot here. You're getting everything you need to shoot accurately, shoot well, shoot a lot, have something for a long period of time. The touch points are all there. They're very nice, very smooth. So then when you start spending over $1,000, now you go into yet another tier, and you can keep even going up from there. I mean, heck, Mark had a custom gun built in that pod venture that we were talking about earlier for probably about $7,000 to $8,000 total in parts and gunsmithing.
Specialized application, very specialized for the situation. You know, you talk about Savage has a rifle that I think retails for about $1,500. They're ultralight. Mm-hmm. It's got a pre-fit carbon fiber wrapped barrel, and they market that towards the Western ascent hunting group that's mountain hunting. They have one with a Kuyu pattern, which is like synonymous with sheep hunting and kind of that mountain hunting crowd. Mm-hmm. So you start to get some of those features that I think are for a specific application. That's where you spend more money. Otherwise,
like truly customized.
That or just fancier features like fit, finish, look. Aesthetics, some of the, we didn't mention this a lot. You did touch on it, Ryan, but you don't see a lot of wood stocks in the entry level price point.
No.
This Mossberg here is one of the only ones I can think of off the top of my head that has a nice looking wood stock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're expensive to produce. You can make a heck of a lot more injection molded stocks on a shift than you can wood stocks out of blanks, even with modern CNC and engraving techniques. They've got that down to a science now where you can take a rough shaped blank. It doesn't have to have any inlet on it. Put it on a machine, and within a few minutes, it's inletted, 98%. There may be some handwork on there, but you're seeing that way less and less and less. And part of that's a big cultural shift too,
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of people got it in their head that a wood stock is not strong or that a wood stock is going to goof you up with like inclement weather, and it may or may not. I suppose it just depends on the stock and how it was done.
Or how hard you're pushing it and your expectations out of it.
I see the modern rifle culture, at least with hunters anyways, people focusing very hard on utilitarianism. Like, you take that gun out, it gets beat up on the outside of your pack, you're sliding down rocks with it, and you just don't, I'm not going to say you don't care, but it's not a concern.
Well, and I think
tool.
Yeah, it's a tool, and I think also, just like you said, cultural shift, right? Mm-hmm. I think people are like, I'm not going to hunt with Grandpa's gun, like an old wood stock gun. Like, I want something that is new and modern, and some of these synthetics are just kind of more new and more modern.
And they do
looking,
offer,
I guess, even,
Yeah, they do offer a performance advantage. It's undeniable. So like, take the T3X again to make this sound like a Tika ad. They've got modular grip panels and modular forearm panels. Now we can change the grip angle and the grip width on a T3X by removing a single screw and sliding this out and putting a $29 part in place. We can increase the width of the forearm and the depth of the forearm by putting a grip panel in place. You can't do that readily with a wood stock. So it's just giving the user more fun things to customize to make fit their own, I guess. And you can't do it with a wood stock. So they've become very popular. They're very stable. They're very rigid. They're very strong. There's undeniable advantage to it, but cost is obviously going to be way lower.
And you're talking too, some of that adjustability is important because you're talking too about how many different body types there are, everybody's a little bit different. And you're basically, gun manufacturers are saying, okay, there's a kids and then there's a women's size and then there's a men's size for all dudes. And it's like that adjustability can be important because it just might not fit you otherwise.
Yeah, it is.
This Tika really, it's such a nice rifle. We are going to dramatically change this rifle, which I'm excited about, but also I half feel bad.
Kind of, but not really. The biggest thing that we're not touching the trigger, we're not touching the action.
Yeah.
Right.
All we're doing is we're putting on a different barrel and a different stock only because it doesn't fit the barrel channel.
Right.
And the heart and soul of the rifle isn't really changing.
Which really, and when you talk, and that's a lot of those touch points.
Yeah.
And a lot of that happens right here in the receiver. Because you got your bolt and your trigger. And, that's kind of the one thing, too, that I always kept when I was talking about manipulating and modifying and customizing my Ruger American. The one thing I'm never going to be able to change is the action, the bolt, and I guess, they make aftermarket triggers for them now, but I just wasn't ready to do that after everything else I did. But, it's just all that stuff is it's still at the end of the day going to be that.
Yep. Well, and we keep talking about or we started at least, with an entry level budget. And I feel like we're kind of like escalating the situation as we go on, right? And something we've talked about, and eventually what will happen to this rifle, this Tikka that we have in front of us, Ryan, is, taking a rifle that it's not insanely expensive and essentially building like a super custom rifle with it, but you've got the action, you've got you've got a good trigger, you've got I guess you don't need the bottom metal because it's magazine fed, so you've got, like you said, all those really, really good touch points in there. You had a couple custom things like a stock, a new barrel, which, like you said, really this barrel would be just fine if we were. But
you guys can use that word anytime you want. Touch points.
It's a better. Thank you, Reuben.
I'm going to keep using it.
Patent pending.
That's right. Patent pending. It's a better platform to start with if you're going to start sinking money into it for custom stuff.
Exactly.
You
That's
might
a good
as well
way to
start
put it.
with a higher beginning point.
No, it's kind of cool too, because I think a lot of times the price speaks for itself. You don't have to necessarily tell people what stuff costs, because I've taken rifles out and I have a couple of semi-custom rifles, and you can always tell, like, if you were to take an entry level and a mid-tier and a full custom rifle, like, and have somebody who doesn't know what they cost pick it up and run the bolt on it, like, usually they can tell which what's what. And like, that's maybe when you there's definitely a place for that custom rifle too, right? It's not just it's just Gucci, or it's just you're just paying for a name. There are fit and finish things that are taken to the nth degree on a rifle that's hand built or custom built for your application, that I think anyone could tell that it's probably the most expensive rifle on the table.
Yeah. No, here's one thing. Actually, I should probably mention, because somebody out there could be just yelling at the radio right now or their phone because we didn't bring this up. But I discussed customizing one of these more entry-level guns, the really sort of lower tier that we've talked about today. And then you wind up putting a bunch of money into it. At the end of the day, it's still kind of the same rifle at the base of it, but you've ended up sinking a bunch of money into it and maybe even exceeding, four figures at some point. One of the nice things is some of these companies have actually already done that for you. And they've brought their actions and their barreled actions that they have here, like you have with the Ruger American, like you have with the Savage 110, like you have with the Mossberg Patriot, and I'm going to miss some of these ones out there that a bunch of companies are doing it. They've taken what shoots good enough about it and can shoot accurately, and then they've done the stock and the magazines and the adjustable cheek pieces and all that around it, like the RPR that you have. Mossberg's, that's name escapes me. The Savage 110, what is it, BA's Tactical or something like that, where you get a built-in 20 MOA rail, a full-length forend with a pick rail on top, and all kinds of attachment points on it that you can attach your Atlas bipod to, or some sort of a night vision device or a thermal device, or you've got different magazines, adjustable cheek pieces, and then because they've done that in more of a mass-produced format, one, you didn't have to homebrew gunsmith it with your Dremel and a screwdriver, and so it actually works better, similar to when you see a factory-built AR versus one you built in your man cave.
Yep.
And then two, since they've done it on a mass scale, they've been able to save money. They probably are able to get whatever stock it is they're going to put on their gun cheaper than you can buy it at Brownells or who knows where. And so all that cost savings has already happened. You can just buy it that way from the beginning, and it may appear more expensive than the sort of stripped-down regular sort of sporter or hunter version. But really, actually, you're going to save money in the long run with one of those. And I've heard lots of good things about them.
There's a rifle that comes to mind. Savage has their 110 competition rifle. Yep. And it comes in an MDT chassis. It's a very popular chassis for PRS.
Nice. Totally.
They have a nitrided bolt, the titanium nitrided bolt body, so it's increased lubricity. It stays cleaner. It doesn't attract dust and debris and stuff as much as it
looks cool.
Yeah, because you can keep it dry. You don't have to run it super wet. And it comes with a barrel from a very notable barrel manufacturer from the factory, and it's around a $2,000 rifle that it highlights the capabilities of that Savage action that you can get in a $600 rifle with a few, like you said, a few performance upgrades or a few more bits of attention to fit and finish.
Yeah.
And now you have a super capable, 6 Creedmoor PRS rifle that you could go and shoot any match with.
And while I know a lot of people like to tinker on stuff and sort of do stuff themselves, if you were to buy the base Savage 110, I'm speculating here, but you tell me if I'm right. If you were to buy the base Savage Model 110 and literally go through a catalog and yourself go online and purchase all the components that are in their competition model and basically build your own to their exact spec, I'm sure you'd end up spending way more money.
I haven't done that yet, but their 110 ultralight with a proof research barrel that retails under $1,500. The barrel itself is $950.
I was going to
say already.
Yeah,
just that barrel alone.
And they put it in their highest tier of stock with a very notable camo pattern on it. And I mean, you're talking about adding it all up, doing it yourself is over $2,000, and they sell it at a discount.
Yeah.
It's just kind of done for you. Like you said, Jim, you're going through that list. You're like,
I actually think it's $1,100.
If I was going to change something, I'd change this and this and this and this and this and update this, and and all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, no, it's already done.
Someone already did that, and they did it probably better than I could do it in my basement.
Maybe.
I got a pretty good Dremel. It's of the high. It's one of their highest tier Dremels.
Comes with a certificate, doesn't it? You open it and be like,
You're saying you're a gunsmith, huh?
It's pretty cool how they do that. It's not actually a certificate so much as it is just a decal.
I understand.
But they know their target market though. Absolutely.
We've talked about a lot of different models here, and I think we'd be remiss we don't have one in front of us, but the Browning AB3. I think that fits into this category.
Got name dropped.
Maybe once.
And the Weatherby Vanguard.
Yeah, I was about to say the Weatherby Vanguard. Is that why we had the Howa 1500 here?
Yeah.
Is that not the...
Yeah. So I think Weatherby set a big precedence a long time ago with an affordable rifle, and they had the Vanguard synthetic for $399. It was an ad.
Yeah.
$399 Weatherby. Had a picture of a gentleman out chasing mule deer or elk, and just a standard synthetic Vanguard.
It spoke to Ryan.
Yep. And I've had them. I own them. I still do.
Another notable brand that's in that 600 and up price point that makes a really good rifle would be Bergara's.
Yeah.
They've come out of nowhere. They make great barrels, and they, if you start to get into the $1,000 Bergara, it's like you're asking yourself the question, wait, the stock? I know because that's that's that brand stock, and then this, and then it's carry the two. No, it doesn't add up, but they're still throwing a rifle out there for under $1,000 that has features that you would probably have to spend $2,000 to buy them all.
Yeah,
separate.
That's awesome.
So they're a real performer in that mid to higher price tier.
Are you guys partial at all to a specific safety style that you like on kind of your general hunting rifle? Because I know I am, and I'm like, am I weird? Am I just used to one thing over another thing? I don't know, but I do like that. What is that? I'd call that a rear tang that comes on the Brownings.
Like an A-bolt.
Yeah, exactly.
What was that? Is that similar to the Ruger here?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get to.
Let me see yours.
Not me. Ryan, I don't know if you ever had this growing up, but we shot 870s because that's where the safety is.
I love it.
And in going to a Mossberg, it was a safety up on the back of the gun. It was nope, you'll shoot your head off. That. That's dangerous. That's just who taught us how to shoot. It's nope.
I bought my Mossberg 500 Persuader over an 870 because of where the safety was.
Yeah, it's crazy because it's just a preference.
So I was well, what happens is when I'm going to be kicking the door in, I'm going to want to have my
you
thumb
can just
right there.
run that safety off with your
immediately
gross motor skills.
Yeah.
The safety I like doesn't really exist.
I don't get it.
I want to.
What do you?
Actually, it does. I take it back. I don't.
You want a Bluetooth safety where you just think about it and it.
It's gone. I like tang safeties for some things. For other things, I don't like them. I think the X-Bolt has the closest thing that I like in a safety, and that is it's a 2-position where it's locked on closed, but then I can actuate a button and open the bolt.
Yes,
and they have that on the top of the bolt handle actually, and maybe it's Mickey Mouse, but here's the thing: I've got a really expensive custom rifle. I was on a hunt with it a couple of weeks ago. A lot of packing, a lot of walking, and my bolt cammed open 3 times. And the trigger and safety mechanism, and there's a $300 unit, and the gun package is very expensive. And the bolt didn't open, but it cammed, like it went to the unlocked position. So the potential for error was very much so there. On the Tikka, a criticism I have, gun is clear, the bolt will open only when the safety is unlocked. Now it's locked. So I have no other way to get the bolt open and clear the chamber other than putting the rifle in a fire condition. Mm-hmm. I don't really have a problem with it, but I can see where, if you're with a group of buddies, you're in camp, you're trying to unload your gun, you got to make the thing hot. What I wish they had was this simple side 2-position safety with an unlock mechanism.
Sure.
Like the X-Bolt. I don't want a tank safety. I want a side safety. I want it very small and low profile. And I want an unlock provision on there. Doesn't exist.
That bolt came open is what got old Slinging Rick the other day on his deer. Remember that when he was saying he went to go shoot and nothing, checked and had to hit that.
Rick shoots a lot of deer. Rick's seen a lot of deer. He's seen a lot of big deer get shot, and we're talking like in the 200-inch category. Not a lot of he hasn't. I don't think he's seen a lot of 200-inch. He has seen a 200-inch.
Slinging Rick.
Yeah.
You don't just call a guy Slinging Rick unless he rightfully deserves that name.
He's adamant that this buck was the biggest deer he's ever seen. He had it in very close proximity during rifle season, pulled up to make what really would have been a chip shot, and that bolt was cammed open. He squeezed the trigger, nothing happened, and then, the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. And it's not always super obvious.
Yeah. No.
Boy, howdy.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully for our listener out there who requested this Budget Rifles podcast, this answers some of your questions. And, anything else from you guys?
I've got one closing sentiment.
Please do.
We are very fortunate here at Vortex to be put in front of our customer base with any number of rifles. And we've had folks that have called us up with $12,000 Barrett M107s and $249 TC compasses. One thing that I have noticed with modern rifles from every manufacturer, they all seem to be safe. They all seem to shoot very well. There is something for every budget. Do not feel obligated to spend exponential sums of money to get a rifle for you, for your spouse, for your child. There's something everywhere, and they're all pretty damn good. We've certainly got some favorites. We can tell you why. But everything on the table that we've talked about and pretty much everything else that's out there is a good rifle. I don't think there's a bad choice.
We got a $150, I believe is it a TC? What is it? Single shot 6.5 Creedmoor over in the case. Oh, shoot. I should have brought it out. Darn it.
That's the ultimate budget rifle.
Oh, ultimate budget rifle, single shot 6.5 Creedmoor, hammer fired, break action, and it's actually pretty darn accurate once you get used to the moderately plasticky feeling trigger. But, yeah.
It's a good gun for you, Jim.
I like that. Thanks, Mark.
That's a good outtake.
I like that point that you bring up there, Ryan, though. That is a good point.
It is a really good one. Yep.
All right. Well, if you guys have any other comments, as we know many times you do, please drop them on YouTube in the comment section below or hit us up on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Once again, don't forget, let us know what you think about this sweet new lighting MC Ryan hooked us up with. And, catch you on the next one.
See ya.
Bye. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation Podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation Podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.